Hello everyone, welcome to Canteen Cup. My name is Scott, and it is cold today, at least cold for the southeast. I think right now it's about 36 degrees. This morning it was about 26. I don't think it's going to get much warmer, so you just got to deal with it. One of the things I always advocate is practice wearing the clothes you plan on wearing when things aren't going your way. That way, if you know how cold it is outside, you know what layers to put on before you step out the door. I have a little system, but that's a whole nother story. I want to thank everybody for joining me on Canteen Cup. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate all the new subscribers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope I'm putting out good content. I am trying to push a little content right now in communications because we got bad things happening, and I want to try to get as much stuff out as possible. I do have some videos coming up where I am moving from the Baofeng. I about beat that dead horse. Like I said, it is a good radio. I have a couple other little accessories coming that I'll comment on, but in general, you know, if you need a radio and you're not a communications person, then this is probably a good radio for you. It's fairly inexpensive. It's not overly robust, but it'll get the job done. And if worse comes to worse, you buy a couple of them. That way, one goes bad, you can toss it and use another one. So, anyhow, pretty good radio. I recommend it. What's coming up in the near future is I am moving towards antenna systems, and in this specific case I am talking about portable and even man-portable antenna systems. And what I'm doing that's a little different than everybody else is I am looking at this from the perspective of having tactical communications. In other words, most people that do the QRP or the SOTA or the backpacking ham radio stuff, what they usually do is they operate on the higher bands, which means they need a smaller antenna, but they can talk further away, and I'm going to talk about that today. Whereas I'm going to emphasize the lower bands where you need a bigger antenna to talk a little more locally. And I'm going to explain that today. The main part of today's video is going to be talking about skywave, radio wave, skywave propagation. And there's a little wren flitting by. It's kind of neat. Anyhow, squirrel. But I want to talk about antennas that you would use tactically, and these are in the lower bands, typically 40 and 80 meters. And I'll talk about them, and I'm also going to talk about some UHF and VHF antennas that I use and do some setups, but that's not going to be this video. I may get one out today, but these take a little while to set up and do, but I'm going to have them, so stay tuned, because this is important, especially if you want to talk in between crews and you're no longer at your home, or you're no longer at your permanent radio station, that you are now somewhere out in the field, and your radio antenna bag is now this big, and you've got to make that work. And so I'm going to talk about that in another video. So moving along, today I want to talk about skywave propagation and how it works. And there's several different types of propagation out there. And before I get started, this is a layman's view, the layman's perspective on how this works. This is not a technical video. It's to help people who are not overly technical at this point, we'll say, get an understanding, a basic understanding of how radio wave propagation works at the different frequencies. So that being said, I'm going to do a little bit of horrible drawing. I hope you bear with me. The first one I want to talk about is what we call line of sight propagation. What that means is it's the, you know, if you can see it, you can work it or you can talk to it, and that applies somewhat of working through trees and around houses and stuff. But the basic principle of it, let me draw my little stick man here. Okay, so just to give you an idea, there we go. This, I have to look at my phone and make sure you're seeing what I'm trying to show you. This here is the Earth, and that little guy, little guy down over here is a guy with a handy-talkie, and I'm going to show you how his radio wave works. And again, this is just a very basic drawing. All right. All right, so you can see that this guy over here is talking, and his signal is line of sight, which means it kind of travels in a straight line. If he's trying to talk to this guy over here, he's not going to be able to talk to him because his signal does not bend around the curvature of the Earth. It also doesn't go through, you know, city buildings. It doesn't go over mountains. It will go through the woods a little bit, but in general, this is how line of sight propagation works. Now, what frequencies does this happen? This happens typically above 60 megahertz and higher. In other words, your little FRS radios, your GMRS radios, you know, the little ones you buy in Walmart, those are FRS. Your business band, amateur radio, 2 meter, which is 144 megahertz, UHF, which is 440 megahertz, and on up. In other words, the higher the numbers, this is how they work. And these are the VHF, UHF frequencies. So, that being said, and there is an in-betweener, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right. So the next type we're going to talk about is called ground wave propagation, or ground wave propagation, however you say it, potato, and that is radio frequencies that do follow the curvature of the Earth up to a certain extent. And these are typically the lower frequencies, mainly 80 meters, which is about 3.8 megahertz on down to about 1.8 megahertz. It's called ground wave, and they do follow the Earth, and they will follow the curvature of the Earth somewhat. And so that might look something like this. All right, do a little arrow here. Now the distance, as you can see, the guy over here, even though he's down on 80 meters or around 3.8 megahertz, his signal is following the curvature of the Earth to a certain point, and then at some point, anywhere from a couple miles to maybe a couple hundred miles, it does leave the Earth's surface and heads up and away. And so this is really good for local communications. Ground wave can be a couple hundred miles. That's why a lot of the tactical radios are in the lower bands, because of this ground wave propagation. Very good for tactical, somewhat long-range communications. This is kind of where you want to be if you're talking in between groups, in between mags or in between crews. All right, the next one is the one that everybody likes to talk about, and it is called Skywave. If you notice, up until this point I didn't talk about CB radio, because CB radio does have some properties for skywave propagation. We call that skip, or they call it skip. We just call it skywave propagation. And the thing about that is, up in the atmosphere we have a layer. It's called the ionosphere. Let's see if I can remember how to spell it. And at certain times of day, the sun ionizes the ionosphere, and it allows radio signals to be bounced back down to Earth. And so now we might have a signal that looks like this. All right. And so now, as you can see, the guy over here is talking, and again, these are on the lower bands, or actually these are in the kind of the upper bands. You start to see this typically 40 meters on up to about 10 meters. CB, by the way, is 11 meters. And so you start to see some of this, and sometimes 50 megahertz, which is 6 meters, can have some of this type of propagation. And what's happening is the radio signal, instead of going along the curvature of the Earth, is going up, and then it's reflected back down to the Earth, and then it's reflected back up again, down, up, and down. And these, in vernacular, these are called bounces. So this one has to bounce twice before it gets to the person you want to talk to. Now this is great for really long distances. You can go for, you know, hundreds of miles. But there's a caveat to this that you got to be aware of, and that is, if you're talking, you can talk to a guy here, and you can talk to a guy here, and of course you can talk to a guy here. But if a guy is here, and I'll put a circle around the X to differentiate, or here, or there, again the X's, it's the X's with the circles, he will probably not be able to hear that signal because it is bouncing over the top of him. He's in that space in between the bounces. So you may have a guy, we'll say 200 miles away, and he can't hear you, but there's a guy 300 miles away and he can hear you loud and clear. So this is what's really called skywave propagation, is when it bounces back and forth. There are a lot of factors involved in this, and I really can't go into the details. This is just a short video, but just be aware of skywave. And this is what you want to talk when you want to talk to somebody across the country. Or if you can, you know, if you can do the math, so to speak, you can figure out what the bounces are and maybe get somebody in that bounce. All right. Then the last, we do also racing here. Then the last one is what we call NVIS. That's November, Victor, India, Sierra. And that is, what that stands for is near vertical incident skywave. I had to sit there. I can't do two things at once. I can't erase and draw and talk at the same time. Alright, for this guy, for this time, I'm going to add a third figure in here. Hope you all don't mind my lousy drawing. And a near vertical incident skywave propagation only operates on the low bands, mainly on about 4 or 5 megahertz and below. Occasionally, or I should say almost rarely, on 7 megahertz. But typically it is 4 megahertz and below, and this is where a lot of military tactical HF communications happens. It's a very good system. Again, if you look at Army surplus radios, a lot of the older ones are in the 2 to 10 megahertz range, which is right there where it needs to be. So let's talk about this. I'm going to draw a picture, and what happens here is, based on the antenna design, you can send the signal almost straight up in the sky. And so the signal goes up, and then once it hits the ionosphere, it bounces back down, kind of like an umbrella or a mushroom. All right. So again, my guy in the center is transmitting the signal. He's got his antenna configured where it goes kind of straight up in the air. It hits the ionosphere, bounces back down, but instead of going far away, it stays pretty close. Now, depending on what band you're on and the conditions, this could still be 300 or 400 miles. But it goes up and comes back down. And what's good about this is now all right, now you see that big black blob there. Consider that a mountain or a tall building or some other obstruction. The signal goes over the top of that, and now you can talk to the guy on the other side of the hill or the other side of the mountain. And this is why it's so good. So for tactical communications, this is a good way to go if the band conditions are for you. And again, you need to have that lower, 4 megahertz and below to really make this happen. And we're going to talk about some antennas on another video that'll help you accomplish that. So that's all I got. Like I said, just a very brief, a very layman's terms, some pictures for you to look at to help you understand, what you're trying to accomplish or what your communications sergeant's going to accomplish. Now, I do have some videos coming, and they are going to be, I think they're going to be pretty interesting, because they're talking about antennas designed for this type of propagation to help you with your tactical communications. So I hope this was helpful. More to follow. I'm trying to push these out as fast as I can, but it does take a little time to plan and organize. I'm not just walking out and shooting a video. I have to think about what I'm doing for a change, but I'm going to try and get another one out today. So that's all I got. Oh, I think it's snowing. I'll be darned. You all get your preps ready. Understand that these are trying times, and you should have your preps. You should be topping off, and just be prepared. Who knows what's going to happen in the next upcoming weeks, or even the next upcoming months. My prayers are out to each and every one of you. Everybody, stay safe and stay secure, and we'll see you.